For as long as I can remember, Islam was the foundation of my existence. I was born into a devout Muslim family in a small Middle Eastern town, where the 5 daily calls to prayer rhythmed our days. My parents, especially my father, were pillars of the local community, known for their unwavering faith and generosity. I grew up absorbing the teachings of the Quran, memorizing verses, and learning the importance of a virtuous life in the eyes of Allah. As I matured, my devotion to Islam only intensified. I didn't just follow religious precepts, I embraced them fervently. Daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, charity, all of this was more than mere obligation. It was the essence of my being, the fuel that fed my soul. Parallel to my spiritual journey, I embarked on a business career. I started small, with an electronics store in the city center. I worked tirelessly, always with the belief that my success was a direct reflection of my devotion to Allah. Every successful deal, every new customer, every expansion of my enterprise, I saw all of this as signs of divine blessing. Over time, my small business blossomed into an empire. I expanded to other cities, then to other countries. My reputation as a skilled and ethical businessman spread, and soon I found myself leading one of the largest technology companies in the region. Financial success was accompanied by social recognition and influence. I was invited to lecture at universities, consulted by local politicians, and revered as a model of modern Islamic success. In my mind, there was no doubt. My prosperity was a direct reward from Allah for my unwavering devotion. The more successful I became, the more I intensified my religious practice. I built a mosque at my company headquarters, encouraged my employees to participate in prayers, and established an Islamic charity fund that distributed millions annually. My life seemed perfect. I had a loving wife, obedient children, a thriving business, and the respect of my community. On Fridays, when I knelt to pray at the local mosque, I felt a deep connection with the divine. I looked around and saw familiar faces, friends, business colleagues, neighbors, all united in faith. This feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater than myself, was indescribable. However, beneath this surface of perfection, something began to change. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A restlessness, a fleeting doubt that I quickly suppressed. Sometimes, during my nightly prayers, I caught myself questioning the purpose of it all. Why had Allah chosen me to prosper while others suffered? What was the true meaning behind the rituals I followed so faithfully? These questions frightened me. I tried to drown them in more work, more charity, longer and more fervent prayers, but they persisted, growing silently like a seed in the desert, waiting for the right moment to sprout. It was in this state of internal conflict that fate intervened. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, as I was heading to an important business meeting, the unthinkable happened. A truck lost control, crossed the median, and collided head-on with my car. The impact was devastating. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and in a matter of seconds, my world turned upside down, literally. As my car rolled over, everything I knew, everything I believed in, seemed to shatter along with the debris around me. At that moment, suspended between life and death, I didn't know that I was about to embark on the most transformative journey of my life. A journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith, spirituality, and the purpose of existence. The moment of impact was like a blinding flash. In an instant, I was conscious, trapped in the twisted wreckage of my luxury car. The next, I felt a strange sensation of detachment, as if my consciousness was being torn from my physical body. Suddenly, I found myself floating above the accident scene. I watched, with a mixture of fascination and horror, as rescue teams worked frantically to pull me from the wreckage. I tried to shout, to tell them I was fine, that I was up here, but no sound came out. It was at this moment that I realized I was having a near-death experience. Before I could fully process what was happening, I was dragged away from the accident scene. The reality around me dissolved into a whirlwind of colors and sensations. I expected to find the bright light I had so often heard described in accounts of similar experiences. I expected to see the paradise promised in the Quran, with its verdant gardens and rivers of honey. But what I found was something completely different and terrifying. I was engulfed by an oppressive darkness, so dense it seemed to have its own substance. The air, if it could be called that, was charged with a sense of despair and anguish so palpable it almost choked me. It was as if every molecule of that place was impregnated with suffering. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I began to distinguish shapes around me. To my horror, I realized they were people, or what remained of them. Spectral figures, contorted in poses of agony, floated in the void. Their faces were masks of pain and eternal regret. With a shock of recognition, I identified some of them. There was my former business partner, whom I had expelled from the company on suspicion of fraud. There, a woman I had harshly rejected when she came begging for financial help. And there, to my absolute terror, was my own father, his face a tortured caricature of the kind man I had known. I tried to approach him, to call out to him, but the more I struggled, the more distant he seemed. His voice, when I finally heard it, was a lament that chilled me to the soul. Son, why have you abandoned us? Why have you betrayed everything we taught you? Confused and terrified, I tried to call out to Allah. I recited all the prayers I knew, begged for mercy, for guidance, but my pleas seemed to be swallowed by the void. For the first time in my life, I felt there was no one to hear me, no higher power to guide me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was Jahannam, the Muslim hell I had so feared, but secretly doubted existed. But how could I be here? Hadn't I been a good Muslim? Hadn't I followed all the precepts of my faith? As I grappled with these questions, I felt a force pulling me even deeper into that abyss of despair. Images of my life flashed before my eyes. Moments of pride, of greed disguised as business success, of hasty judgments against those I considered less devout. Each memory was like a sharp knife cutting into my soul. I understood, with painful clarity, that my faith had been a facade, a mask of piety that hid a heart full of pride and self-justification. My entire life, which I believed to be a testimony of devotion, now seemed an elaborate farce. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. I felt myself sinking deeper and deeper into that sea of guilt and regret. I was certain that this would be my eternal destiny, trapped in this place of torment, forever confronted with the consequences of my misguided actions and beliefs. It was in this moment of absolute despair that something unexpected happened. A faint light, almost imperceptible at first, began to form in the distance. It wasn't the bright, tease, welcoming light I expected from paradise, but a soft, steady beam, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain. I began to move towards that light. It was an arduous struggle, like swimming against a powerful current. The tormented voices around me seemed to want to pull me back, but I clung to that light as if it were my last hope. As I approached, I felt a subtle change. The weight of guilt began to diminish, replaced by a sense of not exactly peace, but possibility, as if that light was offering me not absolution, but a chance to start over, to reassess everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the divine. Then, in the blink of an eye, I was pulled back to physical reality. I opened my eyes to find the worried face of a paramedic leaning over me. I was back in my body, alive, but irrevocably changed. As I was rushed to the hospital, a certainty solidified in my mind. Nothing in my life would be the same after this experience. The pillar I believed to be unshakable, my faith in Islam, had been shaken to its foundations, and I knew I would have to face the implications of this. no matter how painful they might be. The return to physical life was like emerging from a vivid nightmare into a reality that no longer made sense. I woke up in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. My family was around me, their faces a mixture of relief and concern. My wife held my hand, silent tears streaming down her face, while my children looked at me with a blend of fear and hope. "Alhamdulillah," exclaimed my wife when I opened my eyes. "Thanks to Allah, you've come back to us." Her words, which should have comforted me, only served to intensify the sense of displacement I felt. How could I explain to them that the Allah they were thanking seemed terribly absent in my experience? In the days that followed, I was flooded with visits from friends, business colleagues, and leaders of the local Muslim community. All expressed gratitude to Allah for my miraculous recovery, seeing it as further proof of divine mercy. Every mashallah and subhanallah I heard was like a small stab in my heart. Physically, I was recovering well. The doctor spoke of a miracle, considering the severity of the accident. But while my body healed, my soul was in turmoil. The visions of what I had experienced, that dark place that defied everything I believed about the Islamic afterlife, haunted me day and night. I tried to share my experience with my wife, but I saw the fear and confusion in her eyes. "It must have been a nightmare caused by the medications," she gently suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the idea that I might have seen something that contradicted our faith. Desperate for answers, I sought the counsel of the local imam, a man I had always respected for his wisdom. Sitting in his office at the mosque, I told him everything I had experienced. I expected understanding, perhaps even an interpretation that could reconcile my experience with Islamic teachings. But the imam's reaction was one of disbelief and, later, concern. "My son," he said, his voice grave, "what you describe cannot be real. It is Shaitan trying to lead you astray from the straight path. You must redouble your efforts in faith, pray more, fast more. Only then can you purify your mind of these deceptive visions." I left that meeting feeling more lost than ever. The imam's words, which before would have been a beacon of guidance, now seemed empty and insufficient. How could I simply dismiss what I had experienced as an illusion or a trick of the devil? In the months that followed, I plunged into a frantic search for answers. I read books about near-death experiences, studied other religions, sought scientific explanations. Each new piece of information I absorbed seemed to pull me further away from the faith that had once defined my life. My change did not go unnoticed. At the mosque, I noticed sidelong glances and whispered conversations. My longtime friends began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with my increasingly challenging questions about our shared faith. At the company, rumors spread that I was changed since the accident, no longer the strong and decisive leader they had known. The tension at home was palpable. My wife, who had always been my partner in everything, now seemed like a stranger. Our conversations, once fluid and intimate, became superficial and tense. She couldn't understand my sudden crisis of faith, and I couldn't adequately explain the spiritual void I felt. My children, sensing the change, reacted in different ways. My eldest daughter became more fervent in her faith, as if compensating for my doubts. My younger son, on the other hand, began to ask questions that echoed my own doubts, causing even more friction at home. As my estrangement from the Muslim community became more evident, I felt the weight of isolation. Friends who once sought me out for advice now avoided my gaze in the street. I was discreetly removed from the mosque council, and my invitations to speak at Islamic events ceased. The height of this rejection came when I was called to a meeting with the community elders. With grave expressions, they advised me to find my way back to faith or consider distancing myself from the community so as not to contaminate others with my doubts. That night, alone in my home office, staring at the wall where a calligraphy of the Quran once proudly hung, I made a painful decision. I could no longer pretend. I could no longer live a life based on a faith I no longer felt. With a heavy heart, but with a strange sense of liberation, I decided it was time to completely distance myself from Islam and seek my own spiritual path, regardless of the consequences. Distancing myself from Islam was like tearing away a part of myself. At first, I felt completely lost, like a boat adrift in a vast ocean without a compass or stars to guide me. My daily routine, previously punctuated by prayers and rituals, now seemed empty and purposeless. I woke up every morning with a sense of disorientation, not knowing where to direct my thoughts or my gratitude. Determined to fill this spiritual void, I plunged into a frantic search for answers. I devoured books on philosophy, psychology, and comparative religions. I experimented with meditation practices, yoga, and mindfulness. I attended lectures by spiritual leaders from various traditions, always hoping that something would resonate with me the way Islam used to. It was during this search that I had a casual encounter that would change the course of my journey. In a small esoteric bookstore, while leafing through a book about near-death experiences, I heard someone comment, "This book changed my life." I looked up and saw a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serene smile. We introduced ourselves, and within minutes, we were immersed in a deep conversation about our spiritual experiences. Sarah, as she was called, had gone through a near-death experience years before, which led her to question her Christian faith. Her story was surprisingly similar to mine. Sarah invited me to a support group she attended, composed of people who had gone through similar transformative experiences. With some hesitation, I accepted the invitation. At the first meeting, I sat in a circle with about 10 people. Their stories left me astonished. There were ex-Christians, ex-Jews, ex-atheists, all united by experiences that had challenged their previous beliefs. Some had visions of heaven, others of hell. Some reported encounters with beings of light, others with past versions of themselves. What impressed me most was the openness and acceptance in the group. There were no judgments, no attempts to convert one another. Each person was on their own unique journey of spiritual discovery. Week after week, I returned to the group. I shared my own story, at first with hesitation, then with a frankness that surprised me. For the first time since my experience, I felt I was being truly heard and understood. Through these conversations, I began to see my experience in a new light. It was no longer a punishment or a test of faith, but an invitation to expand my understanding of spirituality. I began to realize that spiritual truth could be far more vast and multifaceted than any single religion could encompass. A group member, a former philosophy professor, introduced me to the concept of perennial spirituality. The idea that there are fundamental spiritual truths that transcend specific religions. This notion resonated deeply with me, offering a framework to understand my own journey. Gradually, I began to build a new spiritual worldview. It was a colorful tapestry, woven with threads from various traditions and philosophies. I incorporated Buddhist mindfulness practices, the emphasis on service from Sikhism, the reverence for nature from indigenous traditions, and yes, even some of the ethical teachings from Islam that still resonated with me. Most importantly, I learned to embrace the mystery. I accepted that I might never have all the answers, and that was okay. Spirituality, I realized, wasn't about having absolute certainties, but about being open to continuous growth and discovery. This new approach brought a peace I had never experienced before, even in my most devout days as a Muslim. It was a peace that came not from rigid adherence to a set of beliefs, but from a humble openness to the vast unknown of the universe. As this internal transformation occurred, I noticed changes in my external life as well. My relationships began to deepen. Free from the restrictions of my former faith, I was able to connect with people from diverse backgrounds in a way that had never been possible before. My work also gained new meaning. Instead of seeing business success as a sign of divine favor, I began to see my company as a platform to make a positive difference in the world. I implemented more ethical and sustainable policies and initiated social responsibility programs that went beyond traditional charity. For the first time in a long time, I felt I was on the right path. It wasn't the path I had expected, nor the one my family and community had planned for me, but it was authentically mine. And in this authenticity, I found a connection to something greater than myself. A connection that, I realized, was what I had been seeking all along. Today, when I look back on my journey, I can hardly believe the transformation that has occurred. The man I was, a devout Muslim businessman, certain of his place in the world and his beliefs, seems like a completely different person. The near-death experience that initially shook my faith in Islam ended up being the catalyst for a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of spirituality. My life now revolves around a mission I never imagined for myself, leading a community that welcomes people from all backgrounds in search of spiritual truth. The center I founded, which we simply call Oasis, has become a refuge for restless souls like I once was. At Oasis, we don't preach any specific religion. Instead, we offer a safe space for spiritual exploration and growth. Our walls are decorated with symbols from various religious and philosophical traditions, a visual reminder that there are many paths to truth. We organize discussion groups, meditation workshops, lectures on various spiritual practices, and individual counseling sessions. Seeing people from different backgrounds, ex-Muslims like me, disillusioned Christians, secular Jews, curious atheists, all gathered in search of meaning, fills me with a joy I can't adequately express. One of the most rewarding aspects of my work is helping people navigate through crises of faith, similar to what I experienced. I remember a young man who came to us, torn between his conservative Muslim upbringing and his growing doubts. Through gentle conversations and compassionate guidance, we helped him find a path that honored his roots while embracing a broader spirituality. Of course, not everything has been easy. My family still struggles to understand my transformation. My wife, after years of internal conflict, decided to divorce me, unable to accept my departure from Islam. This separation was painful, but it allowed us to follow our paths with honesty and mutual respect. My children, surprisingly, have been more receptive. My eldest daughter, initially the most resistant to my change, now regularly attends Oasis, finding there a space to explore her own spiritual questions. My youngest son has become an avid student of comparative philosophy, always challenging me with new ideas and perspectives. In the business world, my new approach to spirituality has had a profound impact. I transformed my company into a model of ethical and sustainable business. We implemented policies that prioritize employee well-being, environmental responsibility, and positive social impact. To my surprise, this not only improved our reputation but also increased our profitability. One of the most important lessons I've learned and now share is that true spirituality is not about rigidly adhering to a set of beliefs, but about cultivating compassion, understanding sight, and connection with all beings. I now see that my near-death experience, as terrifying as it was at the time, was a gift. It tore me away from the comfort of my certainties and launched me on a journey of discovery that has enriched my life in ways I could never have imagined. Today, when asked about my faith, I answer that my belief is in the transformative power of love and understanding. I believe there is a universal truth that transcends specific religions, a truth we can glimpse when we open our hearts and minds. I don't deny the importance Islam had in shaping who I am. The values of compassion, generosity, and the search for truth that I learned in my Muslim youth are still fundamental to who I am. But now I see these values as universal, not limited to any specific faith. My journey has taught me that spirituality is a continuous path of growth and discovery. There is no final destination, no point where we can say we've arrived. Each day brings new opportunities to learn, to grow, to connect more deeply with the world around us and with the mystery that lies beyond our understanding. When I reflect on my life, I feel a deep gratitude. Gratitude for the experience that shook me from my comfortable certainties. Gratitude for the people who supported me on my journey. And gratitude for the opportunity to help others in their own searches for meaning and truth. My story is a testament to the transformative power of keeping an open mind and heart. It's proof that sometimes we need to lose our faith to find a deeper truth. And it's a reminder that no matter how dark the night may seem, there is always the possibility of a new dawn of understanding and enlightenment.